slaves, no rulers, no state, no taxes, no cage. To see it is to leave it.
Don't panic.
Voluntaryist Academy is an educational platform dedicated to the principles of non-aggression, self-ownership, and the ethical philosophy of voluntarism. Here, we reject the mythology of political authority and embrace the timeless truth that all human interaction should be grounded in consent and moral integrity. Through rigorous studies, in-depth courses, and accessible materials, Voluntaryist Academy equips individuals with the tools to critically examine the foundations of coercive systems and to replace them with voluntary, peaceful alternatives rooted in natural law. Whether you are new to these ideas or looking to deepen your understanding, Voluntaryist Academy provides a structured path to intellectual freedom, ethical consistency, and personal sovereignty. Welcome. Explore the curriculum, challenge false assumptions, learn to live free. I'm your host, James Cordiner, coming to you live on a Saturday night. As per usual, we go live around 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Saturday night on YouTube. You can catch replays on Rumble and on YouTube, of course. Go and subscribe to the Rumble just as a backup in case anything happens to this channel over here on YouTube. It could happen any day. Who knows what happens with these terms of service these days and everything. So, yeah, I'm pleased to announce that the website is finally back up. We'll go over that in a little while. We're covering the Most Dangerous Superstition by Larken Rose, and it's something that I've wanted to get into for a long time. I just been working my way to it, and we covered part one last week. Well, part one of the series last week is the first couple chapters of the book, first couple parts of the book. Anyways, he doesn't have chapters in this book. He has parts, and we're going to get into part three. We're going to cover half of part three tonight. Part three is an enormous section of the book. And in case you don't know, I'm not going to say quote unquote authority every time the word authority appears in the book, because every time the word authority appears in this book, along with other words such as government, these words appear in quotes. So you can download a PDF copy of this book from my website, voluntaryistacademy.com, at the resources page, and sign up to the newsletter, all that stuff we'll go over in a little bit. But for now, let's just jump right into the reading. Let's just jump right into it. Over here. All right. Part 3. The effects of the superstition. Effects of the myth. Throughout the ages, human beings have All right, so before I really get going here, the PDF isn't the greatest. There's a lot of typos, so I'm going to get through it as best I can. So bear with me if I if I don't hit the words. It's it's not the it's not the greatest PDF, but you can get your own copy, of course. Anyway, so throughout effects of the myth, part 3, the effects of the superstition. Throughout the ages, human beings have dung to all sorts. What is that word? We're going to read from the book. All right, hold on. Sorry. Dung. That word's throwing me off. The effects of the superstition, part 3, effects of the myth. Throughout the ages, human beings have clung to all sorts of superstitions and false assumptions, many of them relatively harmless. For example, when most people believed the earth to be flat, that factually incorrect notion had little or no impact on how people lived their daily lives or how they treated one another. Likewise, if children believe in the tooth fairy or that storks deliver babies, they are not going to become purveyors of evil as a result of accepting such myths. On the other hand, over the years, other false assumptions and myths have posed real dangers to humanity. It could be a simple misunderstanding among doctors, which led them to try cures, quote unquote cures, that posed a bigger threat to their patients than the maladies they were trying to treat. As a more drastic example, some cultures offered up human sacrifices in the hopes that doing so would win the favor of their imaginary gods. But nothing else comes close to the level of destruction, mental, emotional, and physical, that has occurred throughout the world and throughout recorded history as a result of the belief in authority. By dramatically altering how people perceive the world, the myth of authority alters their thoughts and actions as well. In fact, the belief in the legitimacy of a ruling class, aka government, leads nearly everyone to either condone or commit acts of evil without even realizing it. Having been convinced that authority is real, and that by way of it, some human beings have acquired the moral right to initiate violence and commit acts of aggression against others by way of so-called laws, quote-unquote laws. Every Democrat, every Republican, every voter, and everyone else who advocates government in any form is a proponent of violence and injustice. Of course, they do not see it that way because their belief in authority has warped and perverted their perception of reality. The trouble is that when something alters a person's perception of reality, the person rarely notices it happening. For example, the world might look very different to someone wearing colored contact lenses, even though he cannot see the lenses themselves. The same is true of mental, quote-unquote, lenses. Each person thinks that the world is really the way he sees it. Everyone can point to others and claim that they are out of touch with reality, but almost no one thinks that his own perception is skewed, even when others tell him so. The result is billions of people pointing fingers at each other, telling each other how delusional and misguided they are, with almost none of them willing or even able to honestly examine the quote-unquote lenses that distort their own perceptions. Everything a person has been exposed to, especially when young, has an impact on how he views the world. What his parents taught him, what he learned in school, how he has seen people behaving, the culture he grew up in, the religion he was raised in, all create a long-lasting set of mental quote-unquote lenses that affect how he sees the world. There are countless examples of how mere differences in perspective have led to horrendous consequences. A suicide bomber who intentionally kills dozens of civilian strangers imagines that he is doing the right thing. Nearly everyone on both sides of every war imagines himself to be in the right. No one imagines himself to be the bad guy. Military conflicts are entirely the result of differences in perspective resulting from mental lenses that have been trained into the soldiers on both sides. It should be self-evident that if thousands of basically good people were all seeing the world as it is, they would not be desperately trying to kill each other. In most cases, the problem is not actual evil or malice, but simply an inability to see things as they are. Consider, as an analogy, someone who has ingested a strong hallucinogen and who, as a result, becomes convinced that his best friend is really a malicious alien monster in disguise. From the perspective of the one having hallucinations, violently attacking his friend is perfectly reasonable and justified. The problem, in the case of one whose perception of reality has been so distorted, is not that he is immoral, or that he is stupid, or that he is malicious. The problem is that he is not seeing things as they actually are, and as a result, decisions and actions which seem perfectly appropriate to him are, in reality, horribly destructive. And when such a hallucination is shared by many, the results become far worse. When everyone has the same perception of reality, when everyone believes something untrue, even something patently absurd, it doesn't feel untrue or absurd to them. When a false or illogical idea is constantly repeated and reinforced by nearly everyone, it rarely occurs to anyone to even begin to question it. In fact, most people become literally incapable of questioning it, because over time, it becomes solidified in their minds as a given, an assumption that doesn't need a rational basis and doesn't need to be analyzed or reconsidered, because everyone knows it to be true, In reality, however, each person simply assumes it to be true because he cannot imagine that everyone else, including all the respectable, well-known, educated people on the radio and TV, could all believe something false. What business does one average individual have doubting something which everyone else seems perfectly comfortable accepting as indisputable truth? Such deeply entrenched belief is invisible to those who believe it. When a mind has always thought of something in one way, that mind will imagine evidence and hallucinate experience supporting the idea. 1,000 years ago, people would have confidently proclaimed that it was a proven fact that the earth was flat, and they would have said it with just as much certainty and honesty as we now proclaim it to be round. To them, the idea of the world being a giant spherical thing floating around in space and attached to nothing was patently ridiculous, and their utterly false assumption about the world being flat would have seemed to them to be a scientific, self-evident fact. So it is with the belief in authority and government. To most people, government feels like an obvious reality, as rational and self-evident as gravity. Few people have ever objectively examined the concept because they have never had a reason to. Quote, everyone knows, end quote, that government is real and necessary and legitimate and unavoidable. Everyone assumes that it is and talks as if it is. So why would anyone question it? Not only are people rarely given a reason to examine the concept of government, but they have a very compelling psychological incentive to not examine it. It is exceedingly uncomfortable and disturbing, even existentially terrifying, for someone to call into question one of the bedrock assumptions upon which his entire view of reality and his entire moral code has been based for all his life. One whose perception and judgment have been distorted by the superstition of authority, and that describes nearly everyone, will not find it easy or pleasant to contemplate the possibility that his entire belief system is based upon a lie, and that much of what he has done throughout his life as a result of believing that lie has been harmful to himself, his friends and family, and humanity in general. In short, the belief in authority and government warps the perception of almost every person, skews his judgment, and leads him to say and do things which are often irrational or pointless or counterproductive or hypocritical or even horribly destructive and heinously evil. Of course, the believers in the myth do not see it that way because they do not see it as a belief at all. They are firmly convinced that authority is real, and based on that false assumption, conclude that their resulting perceptions, thoughts, opinions, and actions are perfectly reasonable, justifiable, and proper, just as the Aztecs no doubt believed their human sacrifices to be reasonable, justifiable, and proper. A superstition capable of making otherwise decent people view good as evil and evil as good, which is exactly what the belief in authority does, is what poses the real threat to humanity. The superstition of authority affects the perceptions and actions of different people in different ways, whether it be the quote-unquote lawmakers who imagine themselves to have the right to rule, the quote-unquote law enforcers who imagine themselves to have the right to and obligation to enforce the commands of the lawmakers, the subjects who imagine themselves to have the moral duty to obey, or mere spectators looking on as neutral observers. The effect of the belief in authority on these various groups, when taken together, leads to a degree of oppression, injustice, theft, and murder, which simply could not and would not otherwise exist. Part 3, Section A, the effects of the myth on the masters, the divine right of politician. In this country, at the top of the gang called government are the congressmen, presidents, and judges. In other countries, the rulers are known by other names, such as kings, emperors, or members of parliament. And, though they are at the top of the authoritarian organization, they are not perceived to be authority itself, the way kings used to be. They are still imagined to be acting on behalf of something other than themselves, some abstract entity called government. As a result of the belief in authority, they are imagined to have the rights to do things in the name of government that none of them have the right to do as individuals. The legitimacy of their actions is measured not by what they do, but by how they do it. In most people's eyes, the actions that politicians take in their quote-unquote official capacity and the commands they issue by quote of the accepted, and the commands they issue by the accepted political rituals are judged by a very different standard than are their actions as private individuals. If a congressman breaks into his neighbor's home and takes $1,000, he is seen as a criminal. If, on the other hand, together with his fellow politicians, he imposes a tax demanding the same $1,000 from the same neighbor, it is seen as legitimate. What would have been armed robbery would then be viewed by almost everyone as legitimate taxation. Not only would the congressman not be viewed as a crook, but any tax cheats who resisted his extortionist demands would be considered the criminals. But the belief in authority not only changes how lawmakers are viewed by the masses, it also changes how lawmakers view themselves. It should be obvious that if a person becomes convinced that he has the moral right to rule over others, that belief will have a significant effect upon his behavior. If he believes that he has the right to demand a portion of everyone's income under threat of punishment, provided he does it through accepted legal procedures, he will almost certainly do so. If he is convinced that he has the right to coercively control the decisions of his neighbors, that is moral and legitimate for him to do so, he almost certainly will. And at least at first, he may even do so with the best of intentions. A simple mental exercise gives a glimpse into how and why politicians act the way they do. Think about what you would do if you were made king of the world. If you were in charge, how would you improve things? Consider the question carefully before reading on. When asked what they would do if they were in charge, almost no one answers, quote, "I would just leave people alone," end quote. Instead, most people start imagining the ways in which they could use the ability to control people as a tool for good, for the betterment of mankind. If one starts with the assumption that such control can be legitimate and righteous, the possibilities are nearly endless. One could make a healthier country by forcing people to eat more nutritious foods and exercise regularly. One could help the poor by forcing the rich to give them money. One could make people safer by forcing them to pay for a strong system of defense. One could make things more equitable and society more compassionate by forcing people to behave the way they should. However, while many positive benefits for society can be imagined, if only government power were used for good, the potential for tyranny and oppression, in fact, the inevitability of tyranny and oppression, is just as easy to imagine. Once someone believes himself to have the right to control others, there is little likelihood that he will choose not to use that power. And whatever noble intentions he may have had to begin with, what he will actually end up doing is using violence and the threat of violence to impose his will upon others. Even seemingly benevolent causes like giving to the poor first require government to forcibly take wealth from another. Once someone, however virtuous and well-intentioned he may be, has accepted the premise that legal aggression is legitimate, and once he has been given the reins of power, and with them the supposed right to rule, the chances of that person choosing not to forcibly control his neighbors is almost none. The level of coercion and violence he inflicts upon others may vary, but he will become a tyrant to one degree or another, because once someone truly believes that he has the right to rule, even if only in a limited manner, he will not view others or treat others as equals. He will view them and treat them as subjects. And that is if the person started with good intentions. Many of those who seek high office do it for purely selfish reasons from the start, because they desire wealth and power for themselves and delight in dominating other people. Of course, acquiring a position of authority is, for such people, a means of achieving an enormous amount of power that they would not otherwise have. The examples throughout the world and throughout history of megalomaniacs using the facade of authority to commit heinous atrocities are so common and well known that they hardly require mentioning at all. Putting evil people into positions of authority, like Stalin, Lenin, Mao, Hitler, Mussolini, and Pol Pot, has resulted in the robbery, assault, harassment, terrorization, torture, and outright murder of a nearly incomprehensible number of human beings. It is so obvious that it is almost silly to even say it. Giving power to bad people poses a danger to humanity. But giving power to good people, people who, at least initially, intend to use their power for good, can be just as dangerous. Because for one to believe that he has the right to rule necessarily requires him to believe that he is exempt from basic human morality. When someone imagines himself to be a legitimate lawmaker, he will try to use the force of law to control his neighbors and will feel no guilt while doing so. Ironically, though lawmakers are at the very top of the authoritarian hierarchy, even they do not accept personal responsibility for what government does. Even they speak as if the law is something other than the commands they issue. For example, it is very unlikely that any politician would feel justified hiring armed thugs to invade his neighbor's home and drag his neighbor away and put him in a cage for the supposed sin of smoking marijuana. Yet many politicians have advocated exactly that via anti-drug legislation. They seem to feel no shame or guilt regarding the fact that their legislation has resulted in millions of non-violent people being forcibly taken from their friends and families and made to live in cages for years on end, sometimes for the rest of their lives. When they speak of the acts of violence which they are directly responsible for, and quote-unquote narcotics laws are only one example, legislators use terms such as, quote, the law of the land, end quote, as if they themselves are mere spectators in the land or the country or the people were the ones who made such violence occur. Indeed, the politicians' level of psychological detachment from what they have personally and directly caused via their laws borders on insanity. They command armies of tax collectors to forcibly confiscate the wealth earned by hundreds of millions of people. They enact one intrusive law after another, using threats of violence to control every aspect of the lives of millions of people they have never met and know nothing about. And after they have been directly responsible for initiating violence on a regular basis against nearly everyone living within hundreds or even thousands of miles from them, they are genuinely shocked and offended if one of their victims threatens to use violence against them. They consider it despicable for a mere peasant to even threaten to do what they, the politicians, do to millions of people every day. At the same time, they do not even seem to notice the millions of people who are imprisoned, those whose property is stolen, those whose financial lives are ruined, whose freedom and dignity are assaulted, who are harassed, attacked, and sometimes murdered by government thugs as a direct result of the very laws those politicians created. When young men and women are dying by the thousands in the latest war game waged by politicians, the politicians speak of it as a sacrifice for freedom, when it is nothing of the sort. The politicians even use scenes of soldiers in caskets, a consequence directly attributable to what those politicians did as photo ops to show the public how concerned and compassionate they are. The very people who sent the young folk off to kill or to die then speak about what happened as if they themselves were mere observers, saying things like, they died for their country, and there are casualties in every war, as if the war just happened by itself. And of course, the thousands upon thousands of people on quote-unquote the other side, the subjects of some other authority, the citizens of some other country who are killed in the wars waged by politicians are barely ever mentioned. They are an occasional statistic reported on the evening news, and never do the politicians accept the smallest shred of responsibility for the widespread, large-scale, prolonged pain and suffering, mental and physical, which their warmongering has inflicted upon thousands or millions of human beings. Again, the depth of their denial and complete evasion of personal responsibility can be seen in the fact that if one of the victims of the politicians' war games decide to attack the source, by directly targeting the ones who gave the orders to attack all of the politicians, even those claiming to be against the war. And all of the talking heads on the television express shock and outrage that anyone would do something so despicable. This is because, in the eyes of the lawmakers, due to the amazing power of the authority myth to completely warp and distort their perception of reality, when they do things which result in the deaths of thousands of innocents, that is, quote, the unfortunate cost of war, end quote. But when one of their victims tries to strike back at the source, it is terrorism. It is bad enough for those who are just obeying orders to deny personal responsibility for their actions, which is addressed below. But for those actually giving the orders and making up the orders, to deny any responsibility for what their orders directly caused to happen is sheer lunacy. Yet that is what lawmakers always do, on every level. Whether it is the federal government or some local township or borough council, every time a legislature imposes a tax on something or imposes some new legal restriction, the politicians are using the threat of violence to control people. But due to their undying faith in the myth of authority, they cannot see that that is what they are doing, and they never take personal responsibility for having threatened and extorted their neighbors. Part 3, Section B, the effects of the myth on the enforcers. Following orders. The lawmakers give the commands, but it is their faithful enforcers who carry them out. Millions upon millions of otherwise decent, civilized people spend day after day harassing, threatening, extorting, controlling, bullying, and otherwise oppressing others who have not harmed or threatened anybody. But because the actions of such law enforcers are deemed illegal, and because they believe they are acting on behalf of authority, they imagine themselves to bear no responsibility for their actions. Worse yet, they do not even view their own actions as being their own actions. They speak and act as if their minds and bodies have somehow been taken over by some invisible entity called the law or government. They say things like, "Hey, I don't make the laws, I just enforce them. It's not up to me." They speak and act as if it is impossible for them to do anything other than helplessly carry out the will of a power called authority, and that they are therefore no more personally responsible for their actions than a puppet is responsible for what the puppeteer makes it do. When acting in their official capacity, while seemingly helplessly possessed by the spirit of authority, law enforcers behave in ways which they never otherwise would, and do things that they themselves would recognize as uncivilized, violent, and evil if they did such things of their own volition, without any authority telling them to. Examples of this occur all over the world, every hour of the day, in a wide variety of ways. A soldier might shoot a complete stranger, or a couple of complete strangers, whose only sin was to be out walking in a militarily occupied zone after a declared curfew. A group of heavily armed men might kick down someone's door and drag him away, or shoot a man in front of his wife and children, Randy Weaver, because the man grew a plant which politicians proclaimed to be forbidden. Not Randy Weaver. A bureaucrat might file paperwork instructing a financial institution to take thousands of dollars out of someone's bank account in the name of tax collection. Another bureaucrat may send in armed thugs upon finding out that someone had the gall to build a deck on his own property, with the approval of his neighbors but without government approval in the form of a building permit. A traffic cop may stop and extort someone via a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt. A TSA agent may rummage through someone's personal belongings without the slightest reason to suspect that the person has done or is going to do anything wrong. A judge may direct armed thugs to put someone in a cage for weeks, months, or years for anything from showing contempt for the judge to driving without written permission of politicians in the form of a driver's license, to having engaged in any type of mutually voluntary but non-politician sanctioned, aka illegal, commerce. These examples, and literally millions of others which could be given, are acts of aggression committed by perpetrators who would not have committed them if they had not been directed to do so by a perceived authority. In short, most instances of theft, assault, and murder happen only because authority told someone to steal, attack, or kill. Most of the time, the people who carry out such orders would not have committed such crimes on their own. Of the 100,000 people who work for the Internal Revenue Service, how many engaged in harassment, extortion, and theft before becoming IRS agents? Few, if any. How many soldiers went around harassing, threatening, how many soldiers went around harassing, threatening, or killing people they did not know before joining the military? Few, if any. How many police officers regularly went around stopping, interrogating, and kidnapping nonviolent people before becoming law enforcers? Very few. How many judges had people thrown into cages for nonviolent behavior before being appointed to a court? Probably none. When such acts of aggression become legal and are done in the name of law enforcement, those who commit them imagine such acts to be inherently legitimate and valid, even though they recognize that had they committed the very same acts on their own, instead of on behalf of an imagined authority, the acts would have constituted crimes and would have been immoral. While there are obviously significant and less significant cogs in the wheels of the government machine, from low-level paper pushers to armed mercenaries, they all have two things in common. Number one, they inflict unpleasantness on others in a way that they would not have done on their own. And two, they accept no personal responsibility for their actions while in law enforcer mode. Nothing makes this more obvious than the fact that when the properness or morality of their actions is called into question, their response is almost always some variation of, "I'm just doing my job." The obvious implication in all such statements is this, quote, "I am not responsible for my actions because authority told me to do this," end quote. The only way that makes a shred of sense is if the person is literally incapable of refusing to do something a perceived authority tells them to do. Unfortunately, the horrific truth is that most people, as a result of their authoritarian indoctrination, do seem to be psychologically incapable of disobeying the commands of an imagined authority. Most people, given the choice between doing what they know is right and doing what they know is wrong when ordered to do so by a perceived authority, will do the latter. Nothing demonstrates this more clearly than the results of the psychological experiments done by Dr. Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. The Milgram experiments, in brief, were studies designed to determine to what degree ordinary people would inflict pain upon strangers simply because an authority figure told them to. For the complete description of the experiments and the results, see Dr. Milgram's book, Obedience to Authority. The following is a short synopsis of his experiments and findings. Subjects were asked to volunteer for what they were told was an experiment testing human memory. Under the supervision of a scientist, the authority figure, one person was strapped into a chair and wired with electrodes, and the other, the actual subject of the study, sat in front of a shock-generating machine. The person in front of the zapper machine was told that the goal was to test whether shocking the other person when he gave a wrong answer to a memorization question would affect his ability to remember things. The true goal, however, was to test to what degree the person in front of the zapper machine would inflict pain on an innocent stranger, simply because someone in the role of authority told him to. The zapper machine had a series of switches going up to 450 volts, and the zapper subject was supposed to increase the voltage and administer another shock each time the zappee got an answer wrong. In truth, the zappy in the test was an actor who was not being shocked at all, but at given voltage levels would give out shouts of pain, protests about heart troubles, demands to stop the experiment, screams for mercy, and eventually silence, feigning unconsciousness or even death. In addition, the zapper machine was clearly marked with danger labels at the upper end of the series of switches. The results of the experiment shocked even Dr. Milgram. In short, a significant majority of subjects, nearly 2 out of 3, continued through the experiment right to the end, inflicting what they thought was excruciatingly painful, if not lethal, shocks to a complete stranger. Despite the screams of agony, the cries for mercy, even the unconsciousness or death of the pretending victim actor guy. Dr. Milgram himself succinctly sums up the conclusion to be reached. Milgram says, with numbing regularity, good people were seen to knuckle under the demands of authority and perform actions that were callous and severe. A substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. End quote. Of note, in the experiments, there was no threat that the zapper would be punished for the failure to obey, nor was there any special reward promised for obedience. So the results were not merely showing that an ordinary person might hurt someone else to, quote unquote, save his own neck, or might hurt someone else if it was somehow profited himself. Instead, the results showed that most people would inflict excruciating pain, even death, upon an innocent stranger for no other reason than that he was told to do so by a perceived authority. This point cannot be overstressed. There is a particular belief that leads basically good people to do bad things, even heinously evil things. Even the atrocities of Hitler's Third Reich were the result not of millions of evil people, but of a very small handful of truly evil people who had acquired positions of authority and millions of obedient people who merely did what the perceived authority told them to do. In her book about Hitler's top bureaucrat, Adolf Eichmann, sometimes called the architect of the Holocaust, author Hannah Arendt used the phrase the banality of evil to refer to the fact that most evil is not the result of personal malice or hatred, but merely the result of blind obedience. Individuals giving up their own free wit, will, and judgment in favor of unthinking subservience to an imagined authority. Interestingly, both Arendt's book and Dr. Milgram's experiments offended a lot of people. The reason is simple. People who have been taught to respect authority and have been taught that obedience is a virtue and that cooperating with authority is what makes us civilized do not like hearing the truth, which is that truly evil people, with all their malice and hatred, pose far less of a threat to mankind than the basically good people who believe in authority. Anyone who honestly examines the results of Dr. Milgram's experiments cannot escape that fact of reality. But aside from the general lesson to be learned from the Milgram experiments, that most people will intentionally hurt other people if a perceived authority tells them to, several other findings from Milgram's work are worth noting. And they are, number one, many of the subjects of the experiments showed signs of stress, guilt, and anguish while inflicting pain on others, and yet continued doing so. This fact demonstrates that these were not simply nasty sadists waiting for an excuse to hurt others. They did not enjoy doing it. Furthermore, it shows that the people knew that what they were doing, that they were doing something wrong, and they did it anyways because authority told them to. Some subjects protested, begged to be allowed to stop, trembled uncontrollably, even cried, and yet most continued to the end of the experiment. The conclusion could hardly be more obvious. The belief in authority makes good people commit evil. Number two, the subject's income level, education level, age, sex, and other demographic factors seem to have little or no influence on the results. Statistically speaking, a rich, cultured, educated young woman will obey an authoritarian command to hurt someone else just as readily as an illiterate, poor male manual laborer will. The one common factor shared by all of those who continued to the end of the experiment is that they believed in authority, obviously. Again, the message to be learned, however troubling it may be, is logically inescapable. Regardless of almost any other factors, the belief in authority turns good people into agents of evil. Number 3, the average person, when the experiment is described to him, not including the results, guesses that the compassion and conscience of most people would prevent them from continuing through the entire experiment. Professional psychiatrists predicted that only about 1 in 1,000 would obey to the end of the experiment, when in reality it was about 65%. And when the average person, who has not actually been tested, is asked if he personally would have gone to the end of the study if he had been tested, he usually insists that he would not have, yet the majority do. Again, the message is troubling but indisputable. And that message is, almost everyone hugely underestimates the degree to which the belief in authority, even in himself, can be used to persuade good people to commit evil. Number 4, Dr. Milgram also found that some test subjects, defying all reason, were determined to blame the results of their own blind obedience on the victim, the one being shocked. In other words, through whatever twisted mentality it took, some of those doing the shocking imagined that the one being shocked was somehow to blame for his own suffering. With that in mind, it should come as no surprise that when police officers are caught assaulting innocent civilians, or when soldiers are caught terrorizing or murdering civilians, or when prison guards are caught torturing prisoners, their defense is often to blame the victim, no matter how much the authoritarian aggressors have to mangle the truth and logic to do so. Interestingly, even though the Nuremberg trials, just following orders excuse was not accepted as a valid excuse for what the Nazis did, it is still the standard response from countless soldiers, police, tax collectors, bureaucrats, and other representatives of authority whenever the morality of their behavior is questioned. Both in Milgram's experiments and in countless real-life abuses of power, those who intentionally hurt others simply fall back on the standard excuse, claiming that they were not personally responsible because they were merely following orders. In the Milgram experiments, several subjects even directly asked the authority figure which of them was responsible for what was happening. When the authority figure said that he was the one responsible, most subjects went on without further debate, apparently comfortable with the notion that whatever happened from then on was not their fault and they would not be held liable. Again, the message is difficult to escape, and that is, the belief in authority allows basically good people to disassociate themselves from the evil acts they themselves commit, relieving them of any feeling of personal responsibility. Number 5, when it was left up to the zapper what voltage to use, only very rarely would he go above 150 volts, the point at which the one pretending to be shocked said he did not want to go on. It is very important to note that up to that point, and almost all subjects made it to that point, the zappy let out grunts of pain but did not ask for the experiment to stop. As a result, the one doing the zapping could quite reasonably say that the one being zapped had agreed to the arrangement, and up to that point was still a willing participant. Interestingly, of the few subjects who did not go all the way to the end, many of them stopped as soon as the zappy said he wanted out. This could be dubbed the quote-unquote libertarian line, since once the zappy asked to be unstrapped, for the zapper to continue anyway constitutes initiating violence against another, the exact thing libertarians oppose. Unfortunately, those who stopped at the libertarian line are only a small minority of the population. As for the rest, the findings are disturbingly clear. Of the people who would, at the behest of authority, shock someone who calmly said, "I don't want to do this anymore," most would continue inflicting pain, even if the victim was screaming in agony. Is this because most people are evil? No. It is because they have been conditioned to do as they are told and have been indoctrinated into the most dangerous superstition of all, the belief in authority. It should be noted that even Dr. Milgram could not escape his own indoctrination into the cult of authority worship. In passing, and with very little comment, even he opined that, quote, "we cannot have a society without some structure of authority," end quote. He made a weak attempt to defend teaching obedience to authority by saying, quote, "obedience is often rational. It makes good sense to follow the doctor's orders, to obey traffic signs, and to clear the building when the police inform us of a bomb threat," end quote. Yet none of those examples actually requires or justifies a belief in authority. Despite the way people often talk, doctors do not give orders. They are authorities in the sense that they are knowledgeable in the field of medicine, but not in the sense of having any right to rule. As for the other examples, the main reason to observe the rules of the road or to leave a building with a bomb in it is not because obedience to authority is a virtue, but because the alternative is injury or death. If some non-authority in a theater pulled a bomb from under his seat, held it up for all to see and said, "A bomb, let's get out of here," would everyone else stay there, stay where they were, because the person was not perceived as an authority? Of course not. And if government repealed the law saying which side of the road everyone should drive on, would people start randomly swerving around? Of course not. They would keep driving on the right side because they do not want to crash into each other. So, although even Dr. Milgram clung to the notion that the belief in authority is sometimes necessary and good, he gave no rational argument to support such an assertion. It is a testament to the strength of the myth of authority that even someone who had witnessed what Dr. Milgram had witnessed was still unable to completely give up the superstition. After Dr. Milgram publicized his findings, many were shocked and dismayed by the extent to which normal people were willing to inflict pain or even death upon innocent strangers when instructed to do so by a perceived authority. Similar tests performed since Dr. Milgram's experiments have yielded similar results, which continue to shock some people. However, the results really should not be surprising to anyone who has taken a look at how most human beings are raised. Teaching blind obedience. The purported purpose of schools is to teach reading, writing, mathematics, and other academic fields of thought. But the message that institutions of education actually teach, far more effectively than any useful knowledge or skills, is the idea that subservience and blind obedience to authority are virtues. Simply consider the environment in which the majority of people spend most of their formative years. Year after year, students live in a world in which they receive approval, praise, and reward for being where authority tells them to be, when authority tells them to be there. They receive disapproval, reproach, and punishment for being anywhere else. This includes the fact that they are coerced into being in school to begin with. They receive approval, praise, and reward for doing what authority tells them to do. They receive disapproval, reproach, and punishment for doing anything else or for failing to do what authority tells them to do. They receive approval, praise, and reward for speaking when and how authority tells them to speak, and receive disapproval, reproach, and punishment for speaking at any other time, in any other way, or about any subject other than what authority tells them to speak about, or for failing to speak when authority tells them to speak. They receive approval, praise, and reward for repeating back whatever ideas the authority declares to be true and important, and receive disapproval, reproach, and punishment for disagreeing, verbally or on a written test, with the opinions of those claiming to be authority, or for thinking or writing about subjects other than what authority tells them to think or write about. They receive approval, praise, and reward for immediately telling authority about any problems or personal conflicts they encounter, and receive disapproval, reproach, and punishment for trying to solve any problems or settle any disagreements on their own. They receive approval, praise, and reward for complying with whatever rules, however arbitrary, authority decides to impose upon them. They receive disapproval, reproach, and punishment for disobeying any such rules. These rules can be about almost anything, including what clothes to wear, what hairstyles to have, what facial expressions to have, how to sit in a chair, what to have on a desk, what direction to face, and what words to use. They receive approval, praise, and reward for telling the authority when another student has disobeyed the rules, and receive disapproval, reproach, and punishment for failing to do so. The students clearly and immediately see that in their world, there are two distinct classes of people: masters, like the teachers, and subjects, like the students, and that the rules of proper behavior are drastically different for these two groups. The masters can constantly do things that they tell the subjects not to do. They boss people around, control others via threats, take property from others, so on and so on. This constant and obvious double standard teaches the subjects that there is a very different standard of morality for the masters than there is for the subjects. The subjects must do whatever the masters tell them to do, and only what the masters tell them to, while the masters can do pretty much anything they want. Not long ago, the masters would even routinely commit physical assault, known as corporal punishment, against subjects who did not quickly and unquestioningly do as they were told, while telling the subjects that it was completely unacceptable for them to ever use physical violence, even in self-defense, especially in self-defense against the masters. Thankfully, the use of regular overt physical violence by teachers has become uncommon. However, though the force has become less obvious, the basic methods of authoritarian control and punishment remain. In the classroom setting, the authority can change the rules at will, can punish the entire group for what one student does, and can question or search any student or all students at any time. The authority is never seen as having any obligation to justify or explain to the students the rules it makes or anything else it does. And it is of no concern to authority whether a student has a good reason to think that their time would be better spent being somewhere else, doing something else, or thinking about something else. The grades the students receive, the way he is treated, the signals he is sent, written, verbal, and otherwise, all depend upon one factor: his ability and willingness to unquestioningly subvert his own desires, judgment, and decisions to those of authority. If he does that, he is deemed good. If he does not, he is deemed bad. This method of indoctrination was not accidental. Schooling in the United States, and in fact, much of the world, was deliberately modeled after the Prussian system of education, quote-unquote education, which was designed with the expressed purpose of training people to be obedient tools of the ruling class, easy to manage and quick to unthinkingly obey, especially for military purposes. As it was explained by Johann Fichte, one of the designers of the Prussian system, the goal of this method was to fashion the student in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what those in authority want him to will. At the time, the system was openly admitted to be a means of psychologically enslaving the general populace to the will of the ruling class. And it continues to accomplish exactly that all over the world, including in the United States. The reason most people do whatever authority tells them to, regardless of whether the command is moral or rational, is because that is exactly what they were trained to do. Everything about authoritarian schooling and authoritarian parenting, even the modern version that pretends to be caring and open-minded, continually hammers into the heads of the youngsters the notion that their success, their goodness, their very worth as human beings is measured by how well they obey authority. Is it any wonder then that father applying logic to evidence to reach their own conclusions, most adults look for an authority to tell them what to think? It is Is it any wonder that when a man with a badge starts barking orders, most adults timidly obey without question, even if they have done nothing wrong? Is it any wonder that most adults sheepishly submit to whatever interrogations and searches law enforcers want to inflict upon them? Is it any wonder that many adults will run to the nearest authority to solve any problem or settle any dispute? Is it any wonder that most adults will comply with any order, however irrational, unfair, or immoral it may be, if they imagine the one giving the order to be authority? Should any of this be surprising in light of the fact that nearly everyone went through many years of being deliberately trained to behave that way? Dr. Milgram's experiments made it quite clear that the kind of people produced even by our modern, supposedly enlightened society, even in the good old USA, that supposed bastion of liberty and justice, are, for the most part, callous, irresponsible, unthinking tools for whichever megalomaniac claims the right to rule. When the people are intentionally trained to humbly submit to the beast called authority, when they are taught that it is more important to obey than it is to judge, why should we be at all surprised at the extortion, oppression, terrorism, and mass murder that are committed just because a self-proclaimed authority commanded it? All of human history makes the deadly formula as plain as it could possibly be. A few evil rulers plus many obedient subjects equals widespread injustice and oppression. Making monsters. There should also be at least some mention here about the psychological study done at Stanford University in 1971, in which a sort of mock prison was set up, with dozens of students appointed as mock prisoners and others as mock prison guards. The experiment had to be terminated early, after only 6 days, because those who had been given authority, the guards, had become shockingly callous, abusive, and sadistic toward their prisoners. It must be noted that the abuse committed by the guards even went beyond what they were told to do by those running the experiment, which was designed to humiliate and degrade the prisoners. This shows that the personal malicious and sadistic tendencies in an individual is a significant contributing factor to such abuse, but that most people openly act out such tendencies only when given a position of authority that they believe gives them permission to do so. The same phenomenon can be seen in all sorts of abuses of power, whether by a bureaucrat on a power trip, a soldier or police officer who likes to bully or assault civilians, or any other official who enjoys lording his powers over others. These demonstrate that not only does the belief in authority allow basically good people to become tools of oppression and injustice, but it also brings out the dramatically amplifies whatever potential for malice, hatred, sadism, and love of dominion those people may possess. The superstition of authority begins by making average people mere agents of evil, which Arendt described as the banality of evil, but then goes on to make such people personally evil by convincing them that they have the right or even the duty to abuse and oppress other people. This can be seen in the behavior of soldiers, police, prosecutors, judges, even petty bureaucrats. Anyone whose job consists of harassing, extorting, threatening, coercing, and controlling decent people will, sooner or later, become at least callous, if not downright sadistic. One cannot continually act like a monster without eventually becoming one. Another important thing to note, as shown in countless examples of abuses of power, is that while a belief in authority can lead people to inflict harm on others, that same belief often cannot limit the extent to which the agents of authority hurt other people. For example, many individuals who would never oppress an innocent person on their own become police officers, thereby acquiring the legal power to commit a certain degree of oppression. Yet, on many occasions, they end up going well beyond the legal oppression they are authorized to commit, quote unquote authorized to commit, and they become sadistic, power-happy monsters. The same is true, perhaps even more so, of soldiers. Perhaps the reason so many combat veterans end up being deeply emotionally traumatized is not so much as a result of thinking about what they have witnessed, as it is a result of thinking about what they themselves have done. The high rate of suicide among combat veterans supports this thesis. It makes little sense for someone to wish for his own death simply because he has seen something horrible. It makes a whole lot more sense for someone to wish for his own death because he himself or herself has done something horrible and has in fact become something horrible. The reason that the belief in authority can drive people to commit evil, but in the end cannot limit the evil they commit, is simple. Aside from whatever technical limitations they are supposed to be on an agent of authority, the primary concept that the enforcer is taught and the primary concept that he must accept in order to do his job is that, as a representative of authority, he is above the common folk and has the moral right to forcibly control them. In short, he is taught that his badge and his position make him the rightful master of all the average people. Once he is convinced of that lie, it should be expected that he will despise the average citizen and treat him with contempt, in the same way, and for the same reason, that a slave owner will treat his slaves not as human beings, but as property, whose feelings and opinions matter no more than the feelings and opinions of the master's cattle or his furniture. It is very telling that many modern law enforcers quickly become angry, even violent, when an average person, or they call him average citizen, simply speaks to the officer as an equal, instead of assuming the tone and demeanor of a subjugated underling. Again, this reaction is precisely the same and has the same cause as the reaction a slave master would have to an uppity slave speaking to him as an equal. There are plenty of examples depicted in numerous police abuse videos on the internet of supposed representatives of authority going into a rage and resorting to open violence simply because someone they approached spoke to them as one adult would speak to another, instead of speaking as a subject would speak to a master. The state mercenaries refer to this lack of groveling as someone having an attitude. In their eyes, someone treating them as mere mortals, as if they are on the same level as everyone else, amounts to showing disrespect for their alleged authority. Similarly, anyone who does not consent to be detained, questioned, or searched by officers of the law is automatically perceived by the mercenaries of the state as some sort of troublemaker who has something to hide. Again, the real reason such lack of cooperation annoys authoritarian enforcers is because it amounts to people treating them as mere humans instead of treating them as superior beings, which is what they imagine themselves to be. If someone was confronted by a stranger without a badge who started interrogating the person in an obviously accusatory way and then asked to be allowed to search the person's pockets, his car, his home, not only would the person being accosted almost certainly refuse, he would also probably be outraged at the request. He might say something like, "Of course you can't rummage through my stuff. Who do you think you are?" But when strangers with badges make such requests, they are the ones offended when the targets of their intrusive, unjustified harassment, accusations and searches object to and refuse to cooperate. Even when the officers know full well that the 4th and 5th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution specifically dictate that a person has no quote-unquote legal duty to answer questions or consent to searches, such a lack of cooperation, i.e. the failure to unquestioningly bow to the enforcer's every whim and request, is still seen by the police as a sign that the person must be some sort of criminal and enemy of the state. From the perspective of law enforcers, only a despicable lowlife would ever treat representatives of authority in the same manner he treats everyone else. Again, this is not how most of these people would view the world before becoming officers of the law. In their authoritarian enforcement training, They are specifically taught to treat people as inferiors, to always try to gain control of everyone and everything the moment they arrive on a scene, telling everyone everywhere they go what to do, when they can speak, and so on. They are not merely told that they have the right to boss everyone around, which would be dangerous enough. They are trained that they must, in every situation, use whatever it takes, commands, intimidation, or outright violence, to get everyone present to bow to their authority, and are taught that it is a crime for anyone to fail to unquestioningly bow to their will, which they characterize as disobeying a lawful order. It is also very significant that it is customary for police, as soon as they arrive on any scene, to make sure that no one else is armed with any sort of weapon, and to disarm anyone who is, before knowing anything else about who the people are or what is going on, and even regardless of whether the people are legally armed. The obvious purpose of this practice is to immediately create a huge imbalance of power, where only the law enforcers have the ability to forcibly impose their will on others. Imagine the arrogance required for an average citizen to arrive on some scene, unfamiliar with the situation and the people involved, and have his very first thought be, quote, "Nobody is allowed to have a weapon except me," end quote. In short, law enforcers are trained to be oppressive megalomaniacs and to treat everyone else as cattle. And, human nature being what it is, anyone who routinely treats others that way, the way law enforcers are required to treat everyone else, will learn to despise others and treat them with contempt, disrespect, and hostility. However good or bad at heart an individual is to begin with, the way to bring out the worst in him is to give him authority over others. Okay, time for an author's personal note. Several former police officers have personally told me that they quit the force after they noticed that the job and their supposed authority was slowly turning them into monsters. One of them using that exact word. Interesting. In fairness, many law enforcers make an effort to be nice guys and at least attempt to treat others with respect. But ultimately, they cannot treat others as equals and still be law enforcers. They can be friendly and even apologetic about it, like saying things like, "Sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to," and quote, whatever, insert whatever comes next. I'm going to have to ask you to, but their job still requires them to coercively control and extort others, and not just those who have actually harmed someone. A cop cannot treat others as equals without losing his job. Imagine an officer who would do traffic stops or search places or detain and interrogate people or use physical force against someone only in situations in which you would feel justified in doing such things yourself, without any badge or law telling you you could. The same holds true for government investigators, prosecutors, and judges, and government employees who refused to investigate, prosecute, or sentence someone for a victimless crime would quickly lose his job. It is not up to the agents of authority to decide which laws to enforce. If there are morally illegitimate laws, as there always are, all branches of authoritarian law enforcement are required to enforce them, thereby assisting in the extortion and oppression of innocent people. Even if much of what he does is aimed at actual criminals, those who have committed acts of aggression against others, every law enforcer, as part of his job, is required to commit acts of aggression himself. There are some who do almost nothing other than initiate violence, such as tax collectors, narcotics agents, and immigration agents. This makes it literally impossible, in almost all cases, to work for government without committing immoral acts of violence or aggression. Being a law enforcer and being a moral person are almost always, mutually exclusive. However politely they may do their job, and despite the fact that they also go after actual criminals, the kind who have victims, law enforcers are always professional aggressors, subjugating the people to the will of the politicians by way of violence and threat of violence. And anyone who does that, if he did not already have a certain degree of contempt and hatred for his fellow man, will almost certainly develop it. To put it another way, even the nicest, most friendly slave owner, if he continues to believe in the legitimacy of slavery and continues to practice it, will be committing evil and will inflict harm upon the people he imagines to be his rightful property, and he will naturally develop a degree of contempt toward the victims of his aggression and will behave contemptuously toward them. The ability of the authority belief to create harm and the simultaneous inability of it to limit the harm, once the master imagines himself to have the right to rule over his inferiors, can be seen not only on an individual basis, but on a large scale as well. Most of the debates and writings that led up to the ratification of the U.S. Constitution focused on limiting the powers that the federal government would have, and on discussing all the things that it was not allowed to do. The Bill of Rights, for example, is a list of things the U.S. government is constitutionally prohibited from doing. In fact, the 9th and 10th Amendments make it an open-ended list, so that the federal government, in theory, was not supposed to do anything except what the Constitution specifically authorized it to do. Nonetheless, with the possible exception of the 3rd Amendment, the Bill of Rights also happens to be a list of rights that federal agents violate every single day in every state in the Union. In reality, whether on an individual or national level, telling someone, quote, "you have the right to rule others, but only within these limits," end quote, will, sooner or later, result in that person dominating others without recognizing any limits to his power. In the long run, there is no such thing and can be no such thing as limited government, because once someone is accepted by others as a rightful master and believes himself to have the moral right to rule, there will be nothing and no one above him with the power to restrain him. Inside a government, a higher authority might choose to limit a lower authority, but logic and experience show that an authoritarian hierarchy, taken as a whole, will never limit itself for long. Why would it? Why would a master ever put his own interests below the interests of his slaves? The Constitution is a perfect example of this. A piece of parchment which purported to grant a very limited authority to certain people, but which utterly failed to stop those people from going beyond those limits, creating something that eventually grew into the most powerful authoritarian empire in history. And the problem cannot be solved by appointing another set of masters, like a court system, inside the same authoritarian structure, with the supposed purpose of enforcing limits upon the first set of masters. Separations of powers and checks and balances and due process are meaningless if the masters and those assigned to limit them are both part of the same authoritarian organization. Demonizing the victim. It is important to stress the fact that in the Milgram experiments, the subjects thought they were shocking innocent strangers. There was no accusation that the one being shocked was a bad person or had done anything immoral. It should be obvious that if the average person will It should be obvious that if the average person will, at the behest of authority, inflict pain upon an innocent person, he will also inflict such pain with less hesitation and less guilt upon someone he imagines to be deserving of such pain. The U.S. military, and presumably many other militaries, has done a lot of research to determine what can be done to overcome a soldier's natural aversion to killing so that he will kill on command. And one of the most effective ways of achieving this is to demonize and dehumanize the one he is being told to shoot. In modern wars, the governments of both sides feed their soldiers constant propaganda designed to paint the enemy, quote unquote, the enemy, as a bunch of heartless, vicious, sadistic, inhuman monsters. Ironically, this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because such propaganda makes both sides into gangs of heartless monsters, zealously trying to exterminate enemies that they do not view as being fully human. Similar tactics are used in law enforcement. The hired mercenaries of government are far more likely to inflict injustice and oppression upon someone if that person has first been dehumanized and demonized. Just the terminology used by the masters, the enforcers, and everyone else constitutes a very effective form of mind control, which alters how both enforcers and their targets perceive reality, thereby affecting how both groups behave. Such terms reinforce the premise that obedience to authority is a virtue and that disobedience is a sin. What literally happens is that one group of people issues a command and the enforcers impose it upon the masses by punishing disobedience. This is what the mafia does, what street gangs do, what schoolyard bullies do, and what all governments do. The difference is that when government does it, it uses not only threats, but also indoctrination of both the enforcers and the general public, where the message of most thugs is usually direct and honest, like, do what I say or I hurt you. The government message involves a great deal of psychology and mind control, which is essential to making the state mercenaries feel righteous about inflicting oppression on others. The controllers in government portray themselves as lawmakers who have the right to govern society, portray their commands as laws, and portray anyone who disobeys as criminals. And unlike mafia heavies, as they're called, heavies, those who administer retribution against any who disobey the politicians are portrayed not merely as hired thugs, but as noble law enforcers who are righteously protecting society from all uncivilized, contemptuous lawbreakers. Such propaganda goes a long way, not only toward making the authoritarian enforcers carry out violence against innocent people, but also toward making them feel proud of it. They are convinced, via their authoritarian indoctrination, that they are bringing criminals to justice, thereby maintaining law and order. For the benefit of society, of course. But what they are actually doing, more often than not, is using violence to coerce everyone into obeying whatever commands the politicians issue, however immoral, arbitrary, socially or economically destructive, or downright idiotic those commands may be. There is a big difference in the connotations of the two terms, law enforcer and politicians' thugs. There is no difference, however, in what they literally mean, but by persuading the enforcers that the violence they use constitutes inherently righteous and noble law enforcement, their perceptions can be altered in such a way that they will gladly and proudly impose the ruling class's will upon their fellow man. There are as many examples of this as there are laws, but they all fall into one of two categories. Prohibitions, whereby politicians proclaim that their subjects are not allowed to do a certain thing, and demands, whereby politicians proclaim that their subjects must do a certain thing. One example of each will suffice to demonstrate the point. The example for prohibition is the controllers issue a decree that their subjects may not possess marijuana. That prohibition is proclaimed to be the law, and anyone who disobey it are deemed to be criminals. The controllers then spend huge amounts of money taken from their subjects by way of a different law to pay for mercenaries, guns, armored vehicles, prisons, and so on, for the sole purpose of taking captive anyone who are caught disobeying their law. Now consider the perspective of a police officer assigned the duty of enforcing that law, who discovers that someone has been selling marijuana to willing customers. If the officer could objectively consider the situation without the myth of authority distorting his perception, he would immediately see that his job is not only immoral, but utterly idiotic and hypocritical. His job, quote unquote job, being to physically capture someone for the purpose of putting that person in a cage for a long time for doing something that was neither fraudulent nor violent. In fact, until the cop showed up, all the people involved, grower, dealer, seller, buyer, user, interacted peacefully and voluntarily. Furthermore, if the officer has ever consumed alcohol, he would be guilty of something morally identical to what the criminal has done. Nonetheless, he will see himself as the brave, righteous, noble law enforcer as he participates in a paramilitary armed invasion of the person's home and forcibly captures and drags the scofflaw away from his friends and family. When the officer will go home and have a beer, and of course would not react kindly to anyone who tried to forcibly stop him from doing so, from drinking his beer. The only difference, which is no real difference at all, is that the politicians made up a command about one mind-altering substance, in this case marijuana, and not the other, in this case alcohol. As a result, the officer will truly believe that using one mind-altering substance is a good, wholesome, all-American behavior, while using another is shady, immoral, and criminal, and even justifies violent assault and kidnapping of the quote-unquote perpetrators. Demand. Okay. The controllers enact, this is the example for demand. The controllers enact a law saying that any of their subjects who own property must give the controllers every year a payment in the amount of 2% of the value of the subject's property. That demand is called property tax, for those of you playing at home, and is proclaimed to be the law, and any who disobey it are criminals and tax cheats. The controllers then set up an organization of tax collectors to find any who disobey, to either forcibly extract money from them or to forcibly evict them from their properties and seize such properties and give them to the controllers. Of course, if anyone did that without all the authoritarian propaganda, it would be called extortion. Quote, "You have to pay me a bunch of money every year, or I won't let you live in your house," end quote. And very few people, including those who now work as tax collectors, would want to be part of such a racketeering scheme. Yet, when the exact same thing is done legally, not only will average people accept a job being part of such an extortion racket, but they will show disdain for any who resist it. Those who then try to not be robbed are viewed as greedy tax cheats who don't want to pay their quote-unquote fair share, and those whose job it is to forcibly take money and property from such so-called tax cheats usually do so with a feeling of righteousness because they truly believe that the authority of the law can take what is usually an immoral act like theft, extortion, and racketeering and transform it into something righteous and legitimate. So they commit mass robbery, feel good about it, and feel contempt for their victims. That is the power of the most dangerous superstition. Statists often argue that taxation is not theft because governments use tax revenue for things that are for the quote-unquote common good. So it is just a matter of people paying for goods and services they receive. Such an argument ignores the fundamental nature of a situation, the whole situation. A simple example makes the double standard obvious. Suppose a stranger comes up to you and said he had mowed your lawn or left an item for you at your house, and now demanded that you give him $1,000, though you had never agreed to any such arrangement. Obviously, that would constitute extortion, and you would have no duty to pay, even if he really had mowed your lawn or left you something. No one has the right, without your consent, to provide you some item or service when you didn't ask for it and didn't want to buy it. and then forcibly take from you whatever he declares the item or service to be worth. And yet that is exactly what every government at every level always does. When targets of authoritarian aggression are successfully demonized and dehumanized, there are essentially no limits to the degree of violence and injustice which those who believe in authority will commit. For any who might still have hope that the consciences of American soldiers and law enforcers might limit the level of injustice they are willing to inflict upon complete strangers, there are plenty of real-world examples that prove otherwise. One of the most well-known would have to be the massacre at My Lai during the Vietnam War, where U.S. troops not only murdered hundreds of unarmed civilians, mostly women and children, by the way, but also sexually assaulted and tortured some. And some soldiers openly delighted in the suffering and deaths of their victims by the very soldiers' own testimonies. This is what the American soldiers did as a result of their loyalty to the myth of authority, combined with the demonization and dehumanization of their victims. The soldiers themselves put it perfectly bluntly, one saying that they were just following orders, another saying that most of the U.S. soldiers there didn't consider the Vietnamese human. It should be noted that there were some American soldiers who tried with little success to stop or limit the massacre. While this might have been one of the most famous examples of wartime atrocities committed by American troops, it is certainly not the only one. In fact, new examples of the sadism of American soldiers keep coming to light, whereas in the Milgram experiments, some test subjects would demonstrate verbally or by their behavior that they felt bad about inflicting harm upon an innocent stranger. Law enforcers and soldiers who are first taught to despise a quote-unquote enemy obey authoritarian commands even more eagerly, often in a way that shows that they delight in inflicting pain and death on their victims. This was plainly displayed in the images that came out about Abu Ghraib, the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, showing that American troops, male and female, not only carried out mental and physical torture, but exhibited delight and amusement at the suffering of their victims, even happily posing for the camera while humiliating, assaulting, torturing, and raping their prisoners. Both the Bush and Obama administrations prevented much of the photographic evidence of this torture from being made public, for fear of the effect that those images would have on the opinion of the military and the country among Americans and foreigners alike. Again, though the evidence shows that such torture was carried out at the behest of the highest levels of government, it is important to note that the ones who carried out these commands of authority clearly exhibited a sadistic enjoyment of the pain and suffering they were inflicting on other human beings. They had been told by someone they perceived as authority that it was noble and righteous to hate and to hurt the enemy, the quote-unquote enemy. So they did, and they enjoyed it. The same attitude and mentality can be seen in various law enforcement actions, such as the assault on Ruby Ridge in 1992, Randy Weaver, and the raid, standoff, and eventual massacre near Waco, Texas in 1993. Branch Davidians. In neither case was authority going after someone who had actually harmed or threatened anyone else. Instead, both events involved paramilitary assaults based upon the alleged possession of illegal firearms. In the Waco incident, 80 people, including men, women, and children, eventually died after being mentally and physically tortured for weeks with sleep deprivation and CS gas, among other things. The victims were demonized to both the public and those in law enforcement, and the government aggressors exhibited both contempt for their victims and enthusiasm at the thought of killing them. The same general attitude can be seen in dozens of police abuse videos depicting police enthusiastically bullying and even physically assaulting people who are not a threat to anyone and who are not even fighting back or resisting. This is the direct result of convincing law enforcers that everyone else is beneath them and that as agents of authority, they have the right to have everyone else treat them like superiors, groveling before them and unquestioningly obeying their commands. The same pattern can also be seen among tax collectors and other bureaucrats. To what extent the belief in authority actually creates sadistic tendencies, and to what extent it simply unleashes tendencies which were already there, hardly matters. The point is that by pretending to relieve the individual of responsibility for his own actions, and by ordering him to inflict harm on others, and telling him that it is not just permissible but virtuous to harm a particular target, the myth of authority converts millions of average, otherwise decent people into monsters and sadistic agents of evil. Whatever factors normally compel people to behave civilly and nonviolently, whether it be the individual's internal virtues, his devotion to oral principles or religious beliefs, or simply his concern about what others might think of him or might do to him, are easily defeated and overridden by the belief in authority. In short, the most effective way to shut down the humanity and decency of any individualist is to teach him to respect and obey authority. Okay. We're going to take a short break, and just we'll get back to this in just a second. For those of you that wanted to know, yes, the website, yay, is finally back up. Let's take a look at the chat real quick too, as well, while we're at it, while we're taking this break. All right, so the website is back up. Sign up to the newsletter. Newsletters go out. I'm trying to get them out every week on Saturdays now that the website's back up, and you can sign up to the newsletter. Voluntaryistacademy.com. That's where you go. Voluntaryistacademy.com. Sign up to the newsletter. Stay in touch. It's a great way to stay in touch. When you sign up to the newsletter, you get I send out some pretty good stuff. I'm trying to remind myself I got to make a note, but I'm trying to remind myself to include news articles that I've read throughout the week or different podcasts that I've listened to throughout the week. But mostly you get a little bit of information about what's going on behind the scenes, and you get to learn some stuff from me, and I send some goodies in the newsletter. So sign up to the newsletter and get a PDF of the Voluntaryist Creed by Auburn Herbert, and that'll be sent to your inbox automatically. You can become a sponsor at the website too. Your choice, $3 or $5 a month, your choice. Okay. All right. Whoops. $3 or $5 a month for a sponsorship. All proceeds go back into the operation here, tech issues and stuff like that. And in return, you either join a Discord channel. We'll have private meetings, and it'll be cool. And so, yeah, come over to voluntaryistacademy.com to do all of that. And while you're here, catch up on other podcasts. We're embedding Rumble channel videos to all of these. Who to Thunk It is my great volunteer helper assistant, and her name is Jonna, and she's fucking wicked cool. She's a good friend, and thank you so much for helping me out with this project. It's really awesome. And that's the type of people that you get to meet if you sign up to Autonomy. So go to getautonomy.info and see if it's right for you. Sign up and tell them James Cordiner sent you. That'd be pretty cool. Anyways, go to the resources page and you can download a bunch of the PDFs, many of which have been covered on this channel, including tonight, Most Dangerous Superstition by Larken Rose. You can download that PDF from here. A bunch of other stuff. I would suggest you downloading all of them. I'm adding more all the time. I'm trying to add more all the time. Like, for instance, I just added today Death by Government by R.J. Ramel. It's a documentation of all of the genocides that happened in the 20th century by all sorts of governments all over the world. If we look at the table of contents, we can see that, you know, the Soviet gulags, you know, communist China, the Nazi genocide, you know, all sorts of stuff going on. Turkey's genocide, like the Armenian genocide, you know, all sorts of crazy shit in that book. Don't expect that one to be on the channel anytime soon because it is 522 pages. So anyways, yeah, you can go to the support if you don't want to become a sponsor. If a one-time donation seems more up your alley, look, like I'm putting my hand out there. I need a little bit of help. I'm not gonna lie about it. Need a little bit of help. Things aren't going so great on the financial side of things here, and anyone out there that can help with that would be great. And and then you can contact me if you want to send me a short message. That's cool. And then, yeah, I think that's it. You can follow me on all sorts of social media. Don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment and all that stuff. Because like, if you can't help in any other way, help with that. Help with that, because like that's the best way to help this channel to grow, is to just put it in front of more people. So if you want to help me do that, then just, I don't know, help train the algorithm into thinking that my content, or what I'm doing here, if you even call it content, that my stuff is worth viewing, and we can get it in front of more people and they can become one of us. Anyways, shall we finish up with tonight's stream? Oh, wait, let's check out the chat here real quick. Rip is in the chat. Fat Cats, Y8N. I'll read some. I'll go through this in more detail at the end, but Rip is just ripping up the chat. What's up, buddy? What's going on? All right. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being in the live chat. And let's see. Let's see about finishing up tonight's reading here. Shall we? All right. Thanks for everything, guys. Thanks for all the support. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate you. I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for the future, for posterity. I'm doing it so I can say I can say that I didn't do anything as the global panopticon was being set up with, you know, fucking data centers and artificial intelligence surveillance and fucking police states and all this shit that's going to create a dystopian future for our children and old people the old people that are at the center of setting all this shit up are going to be dead and gone by the time the chickens come home to roost. And it's honestly making me really fucking angry. I'll be making a supercut of this book so you can look up the full version so you can avoid little rants and stuff like this. I should keep it to the end, but I couldn't contain myself on that one. All right. What the badge means. What the badge means. Those who do the bidding of a supposed authority usually go out of their way to make it clear that they are doing so. When a soldier dons his military attire, marches into formation, or gets into a military vehicle, when a cop puts on his uniform and gets into the car marked police, when a plainclothes government agent, whether from the FBI, RRS, U.S. Marshals, or any other agency, shows his badge or announces his official title, he is making a very specific statement, which can be summed up as follows. Quote, I am not acting as a thinking, responsible, independent human being and should not be treated as such. I am not personally responsible for my actions because I am not acting from my own free will or my own judgment of right and wrong. I am instead acting as the tool of something superhuman, something with the right to rule you and control you. As such, I am doing things that you can't. I have rights that you don't. You must do as I say, submit to my commands and treat me as your superior, because I am not a mere human being. I have risen above that. Through my unquestioning obedience and loyalty to my masters, I have become a piece of the superhuman entity called authority, and as a result, the rules of human morality do not apply to me, and my actions should not be judged by the usual standards of human behavior. End quote. This bizarre, mystical, cult-like belief is held by every law enforcer in the world. It is horribly dangerous for anyone to imagine himself to have an exemption from the basic rules of right and wrong, yet that is exactly what every agent of government imagines. Despite the fact that soldiers and law enforcers usually display their official uniforms with great pride, what they are actually doing is publicly displaying the fact that they are delusional, have a completely warped and demented view of reality, and have betrayed the very thing that made them human. Their free will and their personal responsibility that goes along with it. Every person who claims to act on behalf of authority is demonstrating that he has accepted an utterly ridiculous lie, that his position, his badge, his office dramatically changes what behaviors are moral and what behaviors are immoral. The idea is patently insane, but it is rarely recognized as such because even the victims of the enforcers share in this delusion. Noble motives, evil actions. It is important to again stress the fact that of those who become law enforcers and soldiers, most do so out of a desire to fight for justice. Nonetheless, because of their belief in authority, their noble intentions often end up being used to harm the innocent and protect the guilty. Because a police officer is supposed to enforce the law and a soldier is supposed to follow orders, their own values and intentions get trumped by the agendas of those giving the orders. Notwithstanding the military recruiting propaganda encouraging young men and women to join up to fight for truth and justice, the true job of a soldier is to kill whomever the masters tell him to kill, or her to kill. It is as simple as that. How many Americans would, on their own, choose to go to a foreign land and kill complete strangers? Very few. How many Americans on their own, if they were in a foreign land, would feel justified in going door to door, interrogating strangers at gunpoint, invading and searching their homes because they thought some truly bad people might be in the area? Very few. These are actions which almost every individual's sense of morality would tell him are wrong. But when someone voluntarily joins an authoritarian military, he intentionally shuts off his own judgment and conscience in favor of simply doing as he is told. Though soldiers sometimes use legitimate force, such as combating aggressors and invaders, they also routinely act as aggressors and invaders themselves. It would be impossible for a government military to function any other way. Imagine an army going door to door, politely asking each homeowner for permission to cross his land. Simply calling the situation war causes the believers in government to imagine that the usual standards of human behavior do not apply. Under the excuse of necessity, soldiers trespass, steal, intimidate, threaten, assault, interrogate, torture, and murder. And they do this even against people they consider to be their allies. The military invasion and occupation of Iraq by the mercenaries of the U.S. government, which was purportedly done to defend the people of Iraq, was an example of a large-scale aggression and coercion, and thus was immoral, even if it displaced a regime guilty of even the worst level of intimidation and murder. In this case, the regime of Saddam Hussein. Yet the supposed evil of the enemy is often cited as the justification for authoritarian coercion. In truth, today and throughout history, large-scale violence against innocents has always been done in the name of fighting for freedom or fighting against injustice. Even when the Nazis invaded Poland, they first staged a series of false flag events and propaganda stunts, collectively known as Operation Himmler, so they could pretend that the invasion was a justifiable act of self-defense. The truth is that even when the evil of an enemy regime is easy to see, making the overall fight seem righteous to one side, the violence committed by authoritarian militaries is never directed only at the actual aggressors on the other side. The structure and methodology of hierarchical armies make it so that innocents are always victimized in one way or another. And not just by accident, but by design. The pack mentality that is such a big part of patriotism makes this unavoidable. In World War II, the American troops saw the Krauts and the Japs as the enemies, rather than seeing the enemy as those individuals who actually committed acts of aggression against innocent people. A concept which would require each soldier to constantly use his own individual perception and moral judgment to assess each situation as he confronted it, which is incompatible with an authoritarian chain of command. Of course, if the people who fit the definition of the Krauts, which are the Germans, or the Japs, the Japanese, many played no part in the conflict, aside from funding it through the paying taxes, which is discussed below. But on both sides in every war, government militaries and the propaganda that they've used, always target and demonize a general category of people rather than just the individuals who have actually initiated violence. The result is that that huge demographic groups end up being ordered to subjugate and exterminate each other, making it so that neither side is ever the good guy in any war between nations, as both militaries also use violence against innocent people, as well as against other soldiers. Perhaps one of the most heinous examples of this was the dropping of nuclear bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which constituted by far the two worst individual acts of terrorism and mass murder in history. Period. Together, they resulted in the deaths of around 200,000 civilians, about 70 times worse than the number of deaths from the 9/11/2001 attacks on the World Trade Center. The admitted goal was to inflict fear, pain, and death on the population of an entire country in order to coerce the ruling class of that country to bend to the will of another ruling class. Ironically, this fits perfectly the United States government's own definition of terrorism, except that that definition conveniently exempts acts that are legal and or committed by governments. If those in government advocate and carry out violent activities that are intended to, quote, intimidate or coerce a civilian population, end quote, or to, quote, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, end quote, then it is considered legitimate and just. If anyone else does the exact same thing, it is terrorism. See Section 2331 of Title 18 of the United States Code. As an aside, the existence of nuclear weapons is entirely the result of the belief in authority. Unlike many weapons, it is impossible to use them for purely defensive purposes. The only reason the nuclear bomb was invented and manufactured in the first place was because of authoritarian, nationalistic, pack mentality idea that it is possible and righteous to be at war with an entire country, and that therefore indiscriminately exterminating thousands of people at once can be justified. Being a member of a government military requires one to contribute to anti-human acts, even if only indirectly, regardless of whatever noble motives the individual may have had for joining the armed forces. The reason is simple. Acting based on one's own perception and judgment and abiding by one's own conscience and one's own sense of right and wrong is utterly incompatible with being a member of any government military, period. Sadly, the result is that both sides of every war are wrong and that they both initiate violence against innocents. At the same time, both sides of every war are also right in that they each condemn the other side for initiating violence against innocents. In short, as long as there are soldiers willing to subjugate themselves to a claimed authority and even to commit murder when it tells them to, lasting peace will be impossible. Those who fight for any government, even if they believe they are fighting for their country, can never achieve freedom and justice because a ruling class, by its very nature, never wants freedom and justice, even for its own subjects, or it would cease to exist. However noble their motives and however courageous their actions, ultimately the only thing government soldiers can ever achieve is subjugation and domination. Ironically, probably in an attempt to hide the inherently evil nature of every government military and to distinguish its own mercenaries from the mercenaries of other tyrannical regimes, the U.S. military pretends that American soldiers have the right and duty to disobey any order that they deem to be illegal or immoral. However, not only is any soldier who does so likely to be court-martialed, but such a principle, which by itself would be quite proper, goes directly against the entire concept of authority and against the specific methods used to train soldiers to be unthinking, obedient tools of the regime they serve. In a combat setting, nearly everything that every government military does constitutes aggressive terrorism, and almost every order a soldier receives is an immoral order, whether it is to trespass on someone else's property, blow up a bridge, block a road, disarm civilians, detain and interrogate people without justification, or kill complete strangers, just on the quote-unquote say-so of a supposed authority. In fact, even when the rules of engagement are only to fire if fired upon, that is still often unjustified. When one is the aggressor, whether individually or acting on behalf of authority, the target of that aggression has the right to use whatever force is necessary to stop the aggressor. In other words, in a lot of situations, shooting at soldiers, including American soldiers, is inherently justified. Killing someone for defending himself against aggressors is murder, even when the aggressors are U.S. soldiers. And almost every soldier routinely commits immoral acts of aggression, believing that commands from authority make it okay for him to do so. If any soldier actually took seriously the idea that he had the duty to disobey an immoral order, the first thing he would do would be to quit the military. Those who act as mercenaries for government, even if they do so with the best intentions, will always be part of a machine that commits aggression as often as, or more often than, it defends the innocent. That being the case, nearly every combat soldier does things which would justify the use of defensive violence against him. However, as conquering invaders always have, the American military commanders label anyone who resists their acts of aggression as an enemy combatant, an insurgent, or a terrorist. When aggression is committed in the name of authority, many then view any act of self-defense against such an aggression as a sin. As much as American authoritarians might be outraged at the suggestion, the truth is that many thousands of people the world over have had good cause to shoot at American soldiers. When a person who has not harmed or threatened anyone in his own home, minding his own business, and heavily armed thugs break down his door, point machine guns at him and his family, threatening and ordering them around, the homeowner has the absolute right to protect himself and his family by whatever means necessary, including killing the armed intruders. The average American, if he were the victim of such an assault by foreign mercenaries, would feel perfectly justified in using whatever violence was necessary to repel the attackers. But if his fellow Americans were the ones committing such assaults in a foreign land, that same American, having been steeped in authority worship and pack mentality, will support the troops. Oh my God. And will cheer when American soldiers murder a homeowner who attempts to forcibly resist such aggression and thuggery. Authoritarian military actions are never purely defensive. When governments declare war, it is never to defend the innocent or to preserve freedom, though that is always the stated purpose. When governments engage in war, it is always to protect or add to the territory or other resources controlled by that government. The ruling class, by its very nature, does not even want its own subjects to be free, much less the subjects of some foreign ruler. As a result, though one who dies in combat is often said to have given his life for his country, in reality those who die in war are simply resources spent by tyrants in various turf wars with other competing gangs of tyrants. The people are fed propaganda about heroism, sacrifice, about patriotism, to hide the fact that government patriotism, to hide the fact that governments never enter wars to serve justice or freedom. They do it to serve their own power. An objective examination of history makes this obvious. Even one of the most apparently justifiable military endeavors in history, the Allies in World War II fighting against the Axis of power, while it resulted in the defeat of the third worst mass murderer in history, Adolf Hitler, it also resulted in the worst mass murderer in history, Joseph Stalin, essentially being given half of Europe by the rulers of the Allied nations. The motive of most of the American soldiers who fought in the war was undoubtedly to protect the good from the evil, but the motives of those who commanded them, and therefore the actual results of the brave soldiers' efforts, was nothing more than authoritarian conquest and power. In World War II, one could have at least suggested, with some imagination, the possibility of an invasion of the United States, and thereby claim that it was an act of self-defense because national security was at stake. But most U.S. military operations have involved no direct threat at all to the U.S. 30-some thousand Americans died in the Korean War. No one imagined that North Korea was going to invade the U.S. 50-some-odd thousand Americans died in the Vietnam War. No one imagined that North Vietnam was going to invade the U.S. No one imagined that the armies of Iraq or Afghanistan were going to invade the U.S. The excuse for such conflicts has always been a vague cause, such as fighting communism, or even more ethereal excuse of having a war on terror, which is made more ironic by the fact that terrorist tactics were and continue to be routinely used by U.S. forces. The sad irony is that the American ruling class, because of the legitimacy of its victims imagine it to have, is the only gang actually capable of conquering and subjugating the American people. The gigantic military machine and all the war games it has engaged in, rather than providing a shred of real protection for the American public, is what created most existing foreign threats, and what is still used as the excuse to justify the oppression of Americans by their own government via the Orwellian-named Patriot Act. Among other things, among other things. Yes, the Patriot Act, among other things. The Orwellian named Patriot Act, among other things. It's getting late. The proper bumper sticker that says, quote, "If you love your freedom, think a veteran," end quote, is a continuing symptom of the pack mentality, state-worshipping propaganda that ruling classes feed to their subjects so that the masters will continue to have pawns to play in their sadistic, destructive power games. Even when a slave master fights to prevent some other slave master from stealing his slaves, he is still no friend of the slaves themselves. It is quite understandable that someone who has risked his life, gone through hell, harmed or killed other human beings, possibly including innocents, and suffered physical or emotional trauma as a result, would be reluctant to accept that all his courage, his suffering, and the damage he inflicted on others ultimately served only the schemes of megalomaniacs. However, even some of the most famous military personalities in history have eventually come to acknowledge that governments engage in war not for any noble purpose, but for profits and power. Major General Smedley Butler, who at the time of his death in 1940 was the most decorated U.S. Marine in history, wrote a book titled "War is a Racket" that criticized the military-industrial complex, saying that war, quote, "is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many," end quote, even going so far as to describe his own military service as the actions of, quote, "a high-class muscle man," end quote, a racketeer and a gangster. Likewise, General Douglas MacArthur opined that military expansion is driven by an, quote, "artificially induced psychosis of war hysteria," end quote, and quote, "an incessant propaganda of fear," end quote. General MacArthur also said the following, quote, "The powers in charge keep us in a perpetual state of fear, keep us in a continuous stampede of patriotic fervor with the cry of grave national emergency. Always there has been some terrible evil to gobble us up if we did not blindly rally behind it by furnishing the exorbitant sums demanded. Yet, in retrospect, these disasters seem never to have happened, seem never to have been quite real," end quote. Of course, to criticize war as a racket which benefits only the ruling class is not to say that the ruling class on the other side is also not evil. Is not also evil, or should be resisted, or should not be resisted, excuse me. The atrocities committed by the enforcers of the regimes of Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Lenin, Pol Pot, and many others were extremely serious, and the use of defensive violence against the acts of aggression committed by the agents of such regimes was certainly justified. But authoritarian warfare pits pawn against pawn in large-scale bloody combat which covers huge geographical areas, always victimizing civilian populations in the process, while the ruling class on both sides watch from a safe distance. Further evidence that war is never about ideals or principles in the fact that the U.S. government has often waged war against tyrants puts into place, such as Manuel Noriega and Saddam Hussein. An even more blatant example of how war is not about principles is the fact that at the beginning of World War II, Joseph Stalin and his Soviet Union were sworn enemies of the United States. By the end of the war, the psychotic mass murderer was referred to as Uncle Joe by the U.S. government propagandists and was treated as a noble ally. Stalin's crimes against humanity, resulting in tens of millions of deaths, went largely unmentioned in the U.S. at the time. In light of that fact, it is absurd to claim that the U.S. government decided to enter World War II based on any moral principle or to defeat evil. It is important to note what does not and what does not occur in traditional international warfare. Competing ruling classes, including the American rulers, are content to watch their respective pawns slaughtering each other by the thousands. But it has long been the official policy of many governments, including the U.S. government, not to attempt to kill foreign rulers, i.e., the ones most responsible for making the war happen. In truth, the most moral and the most rational and the most cost-effective means of defense against any invading authority is the assassination of those who command it. Targeting governments instead of their loyal enforcers would serve humanity wonderfully, not only ending most violent conflicts a lot more quickly, but creating a huge deterrent to any megalomaniac tempted to start conflicts in the first place. Yet there is an open, mutual standing agreement between most high-level tyrants that, while it is okay to play games with the lives of their subjects, they will rarely target each other. And so, over and over again, huge numbers of soldiers march out onto battlefields to kill each other, while the real enemies of humanity, the rulers on both sides, remain out of harm's way. Thus, the lives of the well-intentioned soldiers, the brave government enforcers who loyally follow orders to the bitter end, and are utterly wasted in endeavors which, by design, ultimately achieve real freedom and justice for no one. And if a soldier manages to recognize and target the ones most responsible for injustice and oppression, those who wear the label of government on both sides of every war, he is condemned as a traitor and a terrorist. Proudly committing evil. Whether it is a soldier or some low-level bureaucrat, the job of all law enforcers whether it is a soldier or some low-level bureaucrat, the job of all law enforcers is to forcibly inflict the will of the ruling class upon the general public. Nonetheless, most imagine that as they do so, they are serving the people. Of course, the idea of serving someone by initiating violence against him is ridiculous. Consider the oxymoron of the absurdly named Internal Revenue Service, which does nothing but rob hundreds of millions of people of trillions of dollars every year, rather than ever considering the possibility that what they do on a regular basis, participating in a system of aggression and coercion, is immoral and uncivilized. Most state mercenaries, from the paper pusher to the hired killer, simply say that they are just doing their jobs. And imagine that absolves them of all personal responsibility for their actions and the results of those actions. This, above all else, has been the downfall of human society. Most of the evil and injustice committed by human beings is not the result of greed or malice or even hatred. It is the result of people doing what they are told, people following orders, people doing their jobs. In short, most of man's inhumanity to man is a direct result of the belief in authority. The damage done by the merely obedient is just as real and just as destructive as if they had each done it from personal malice. So whether an old lady is robbed by an armed street thug or a well-dressed, well-educated tax collector makes no difference, morally or in practical terms. Whether a family in Iraq is killed by soldiers of Saddam Hussein or by soldiers of the United States government makes no difference, morally or in practical terms. Whether someone's personal choices are coercively controlled by a neighborhood thug or by the police makes no difference, morally or in practical terms. The only difference is that the authoritarian thug, as a result of his delusional belief in the mythical entity called government, refuses to accept personal responsibility for his own actions. His belief in the most dangerous superstition renders him unable to recognize evil as evil. In fact, he will feel proud of his loyal obedience to his masters as he spends day after day inflicting hardship and suffering upon innocent people. Because he has been taught for all of his life that when evil becomes law, it ceases to be evil and becomes good. In truth, if anything is a sin, it is blind obedience to authority. Acting as an enforcer for government amounts to spiritual suicide, actually worse than physical suicide, because every authoritarian enforcer not only shuts off the free will and ability to judge, which makes him human, thus killing his own humanity, but also leaves his body intact, to be used by tyrants as a tool for oppression. To be a law enforcer is to willingly change one's self from a person into a robot which is then given to some of the most evil people in the world to be used to dominate and subjugate the human race. Wearing the uniform of a soldier or the badge of a law enforcer is not a reason for pride. It should be cause for great shame at having forsaken one's own humanity in favor of becoming a pawn of oppressors. And with that, we will stop the reading for tonight. Okay? So let me know what you guys think in the comments there in the chat. Let's reopen the chat and examine it closely. Move the microphone back in front of me. First comment that I see is Rip saying, great channel. I hope you're, thank you. Let's see what else is going on here. Fat Cats at the very beginning of the chat here, live chat. Come and say hello. Military retired. Fat Cat says he's military retired now, a Christian anarchist. It took over 60 years to see it loud and clear, but you got there. You know? You got there, dude. You got there. I mean, you still cashing those military checks? Asking for a friend. You know, you're military retired, you getting those checks every month, bud? Everyone's got to, live. I get it, but Christian anarchist, huh? I'm just wondering. You don't have to tell me. It's none of my business, but I don't know. I know a lot of people that are retired military and whatever, and, they claim to be really upset with government and everything, but they cash those checks. Let's see, is it okay if I say get a dog up? Yeah. I don't know what that means. Rip is just dominating this. I can always count on Rip to come in and have a good time in the chat. Rip also says a lot of people imagine themselves as stars, as star seeds these days. I actually had a magic mushroom from up the top. So oh wait, okay. The hallucination of truth will be self-evident. Rip is having a good time. A lot of people imagine themselves as star seeds these days. I think that's like the whole star seed thing. That might be pretty harmful to people having their boots on the ground. I mean, it's one thing to have your head in the clouds, but your boots got to be on the ground. That's the whole point of all of this, is that while the new age propaganda is being kind of put out there and put into people's faces, it's largely, from what I understand, it seems to be to get people detached from reality and living in this world where, like, the truth doesn't even exist. They don't even believe in the existence of truth. And if without the belief in the existence of truth, then you have no attachment to reality, and therefore moral relativism and postmodernism and solipsism, for that matter, which is the disregard for the existence of truth. That's what solipsism is. It's to say that you can never know anything, right? Solipsism is the belief, is the disbelief of truth, the belief in you never know anything. You never really know. Okay, well, then you tell me why raping somebody is wrong. If truth doesn't exist, then defend rape. That's what you got to do. That's what's on you now. If you want to claim that truth doesn't exist, so go for it. Have fun doing that, fucking weirdo. So, but this is part of the problem these days. New age propaganda. Never be angry. Be passive. Always. Be submissive. Be passive. Truth doesn't exist. Reality. It's a whatever. Whether it's a simulation or not is to be discovered. I think that it is creative. The universe has been creative. There is a creative design to the universe. I'm a spiritual being as well. I just don't have my head in the clouds so much as my boots are on the ground. The work is done in reality. While your head is in the clouds, if you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, are you really that conscious? Are you people out there that want to talk about having a higher consciousness? Consciousness is having an awareness of the world around you. If you're not paying attention to reality and what's going on and what these government soul-sucking fucking freaks are trying to do to humanity, then you're not conscious of much, are you? You're a retard. And I mean that in all due respect to people with, lowered mental faculties that are not of their design or in their control. I mean that as a person that just is slow, just as the word is meant to be used. So you got to be in reality. You got to be an agent of change in reality, and you need to be conscious of your surroundings in order to have any sort of consciousness at all. You at least be aware of your surroundings and what truth is, because truth is that, there are harmful actions that everyone is capable of doing, but with free will and knowledge of the consequences of those actions, i.e. another person being harmed, you go and say, I'm not going to do that, because why would I wouldn't like it if it were done to me. So I'm not going to do that to another person. That's the whole point of not following orders and not being a violent person, not working for the government, not going out and assaulting people or transgressing upon other people's natural law rights. You don't go out and do that stuff because you know that it sucks when it happens to you and that they're another human being. So it must suck when it happens to them. You don't know their life. You don't know if they're some sort of sadomasochist and they get off on that stuff. There's some weird people out there, and that's behind closed doors. If they're doing that stuff, it's none of my business. Have fun. You're a consenting adult with another consenting adult, and then you just do what you want to do with your life. It's none of my business. But we have only to assume that with a similar nervous system as the one that we have, another human being feels pain similar ways that you feel pain. So you don't go out and do those things because it sucks. You don't want to go out and go and punch people in the face because it sucks when you get punched in the face. You don't go and steal from people because if you've ever had something stolen from you, in whatever form, shape, or design, like it sucks when you have something stolen from you. So don't go and do that to other people. That's what this whole entire thing about order following is all about. Why you don't go and do it. Why? Because you're going to be told to do things that aren't good for other people. That's what we went over in this whole thing tonight. So yeah, I am very weary about new age bullshit, as my friend Mark Passio might call it. Very, very weary of new age bullshit. And I think everyone else should be too. There's a great presentation by Mark Passio on street smart spirituality, where it's sort of about what I'm talking about here, where it's, understand there's a creative design to the universe and that we are spiritual beings and that we have a soul, and that soul is connected to something greater than what is what is, around us, and that there is a lot of questions that aren't being answered. And part of the reason why they're not being answered is because of the very government and order followers that are attempting to lock this place down. We have a fight on our hands here in reality that is preventing us from knowing the greater truths of the universe. And if we don't get on the board game here and we don't start making some actual change in the world, we're never going to break out of this prison planet. We will never make any real change in the universe. The human species will always be a slave species if we continue to allow the belief of authority to dictate what we do in our daily lives. I am not saying to go out there and do anything that could be perceived as violent. That is not what I'm saying at all. But what we can do is we can exit and build. We can build parallel economies. We can build parallel systems to what they are trying to set up. And we can say, no, thank you, please. And when it's time for the shit to hit the fan, we're going to be on the defensive side to their aggression. And even if we die, the universe will respect our righteous sacrifice for freedom and truth and liberty. It's just how it's going to have to be. At some point or another, people are going to have to make a choice. The choice is not probably not now. We're not organized. We're not really on the same page. People out there that claim to be spiritual beings and think that truth doesn't exist. How the fuck do you even have those? That's some serious cognitive dissonance. How the fuck do you even have those two things being held in your mind at the same time? I'm a spiritual being. Truth doesn't exist. Fuck you. You're an idiot. I don't want to be anywhere near you if that's the way you think. I really don't. It's so weird. Well, then what's your spirit then? Go ahead. Tell me. Okay, is that true? Oh, wait a minute. Oh my God. Wonder if there's I'm just going off on this stuff. I don't know what it just sets me off. It just makes me so upset to think that like all the time and energy that's being wasted on this stupid new age shit while we're literally seeing an artificial intelligence powered global panopticon being set up. Meanwhile, the controlled demolition of our everyday lives and the comforts and everything that we have in our lives, the controlled demolition of our country, not only in a geographical sense or the land, but like also, any sort of society that has been set up where people at least have the ability to operate within in a civilized manner and not have to feel like they have to be mad at their neighbors for anything. I'm talking about like the divide and conquer techniques that have been used with all the tribalism and everything that has been put into the minds of the people. There's a controlled demolition of everything going on to usher in a new world order. And like, I know it sounds conspiratorial because it is conspiratorial. There's a group of people that are out there with their plans, and they're making headway on those plans. Data centers being set up all over the place, people not being able to afford food, not being able to afford to even go to work, not even being able to afford to go and get educated if they want to get educated, and then get piled on with massive amounts of debt that they can never get out of. That's slavery. The amount of slavery is just increasing all the time. And no one is sitting here willing to point the finger and look at it objectively and say, this is wrong, because there's too many people out there that don't even want to admit that something can be wrong. They don't even think that truth exists. And these types of fucking children that are in the mindset of a child that's in an adult body, and they go out there and they think that their vote matters, and they're consenting to a ruling class that wants to kill you. They want to enslave your children. They want to fucking propagandize people and, do this whole like intergenerational cultural conditioning upon your own children to make it so that they don't even think that the rights exist, because it's not a part of their lives. And I've gone over this on the channel many a time, but the way that they do it is like they're not going to, like, the primary example that I always give is like the Republican gun nut, they're coming after me guns, a whole propaganda narrative thing. They're not. They're going after the idea of owning guns in the future generations. And if they can do that for like 2 or 3 more generations of youth, they got it. It's done. We lost. They got us. It's over. Game over, man. Game over. They're not after you. They're after your kids. They're after the future. They're setting up a dystopian fucking nightmare for the future, and too many old people are on board with it, and they're going to be dead before those chickens come home to roost. They're going to be dead long before. It's just like Anthony Fauci and all the people, the branch COVIDians and all that shit that was going on for the last 6 years. And, since the COVID pandemic, all the people that were on board with all that shit, like all the real old people that you would expect to be like, nope, we know the tales of history. The young generations don't know as much as we do, and we're going to stand up for the young generations. No, they're the first ones to go, you got to protect grandma. You don't want to kill granny. Okay, no, I don't. But it's also it's also the onus is on the older generations to stand up for the younger ones that don't know better. That's how I was always taught when I was growing up, that your parents and that your grandparents were going to be there for you and say, no, you're not allowed to do that to the youth, because the youth doesn't know any better, and we're going to protect them. And what was the first thing that they did? Betrayed them. That's what it was. And they're all going to be dead before any of the consequences of their actions actually bear fruit. And the same thing is happening now with people like Kevin O'Leary, the guy from Shark Tank, building a fucking data center out in goddamn Utah and claiming that we're an intelligence race with China. You want China to win? No one cares. No, we don't want America to become a fucking dystopian nightmare. Let the people decide. Oh, and the people did decide, but the people... the people in the government of that county, the government commissioners, the county commissioners are like, they're on board with it. But I thought it was about the will of the people. I thought that's the whole setup is about the will of the people. The people are in mass saying they don't want it. But 3 people out of the 65,000 people that live in that county, 3 of them get to go and say, yeah, we can go and do this and destroy the landscape and do all this stuff and destroy the natural infrastructure of our county and do all this crazy shit that's going to make all these people's lives miserable. It's a wonder no one's just, I don't even want to say it, but it's a wonder that it's not being taken to a degree, a certain extreme. But we have a lot of work to do, and we're not going to get that work done. We're not going to get that work done if we can't even agree agree on the fact, again, that something as simple as truth existing. We're never going to get anything done if we can't even agree on that fact. We can't even agree the fact that there is just some actions that no matter who does them, even if that person or group that are doing those things claim to be doing them for other people's benefit, they're wrong. You're never going to do, you can't go and do those things and claim that you have the right to do them. You cannot delegate the right you cannot delegate the right for other groups to do those things on your behalf, because you don't have the individual right to do those things. Like murder, rape, assault, theft, coercion, trespassing, deception, those things, you can't go and do them. You don't have the right to do them. So you cannot delegate another person, you cannot delegate the right to another person or group to do those things on your behalf. That is the truth. And the sooner we come to realize that, and the sooner we start saying no to the people that claim that they have the right to do the things that we don't have the right to do as individuals, those groups and entities like government, the sooner we come to face that fact, and the sooner we start saying no to those people, the sooner we're going to be able to start actually making progress in this freedom movement. Because right now it's a bowel movement. That's what the freedom movement is. It's a bowel movement. It's nothing. It's nothing. Libertarian parties squabbling with each other, disaffiliating the LPNH for stupid fucking reasons. Who cares? They're all statists. There might be some of them that see it as a means to an end. And that utilitarian argument has been played out. You're still a moral relativist if you think that a government can be used as a means to an end. You're still just molding morality to your liking, and you're using a government as a weapon against certain people. It's immoral to do that no matter what. It's the only moral position to have to what they should disaffiliate is the belief in authority. They should disaffiliate themselves from the belief in authority, and then we can actually make some progress. But other than that, all you're doing is acting violent toward innocent people. That's all you're doing. Your claim of authority is illegitimate. no matter how many people say it is, no matter how many people say otherwise. It's always illegitimate, even when you claim to be the party of principle, like libertarians claim to be party of principle. You know, that's why the graphic that's up there in the upper whatever right-hand corner of the screen, that's why it's been going through so many changes lately, because I just can't. They use the same colors. I don't know. I like the color. Yeah, I like the color. Whatever, dude. I don't even want to really get into it. It's so petty and stupid, and I feel like a dummy for even paying attention to that. But like, really, it's really hard to be affiliated with them. I mean, it's really hard for me as an anarchist to really, you know, understand them. But I approve of like what some of them are doing in the sense that, like, as individuals, it's kind of funny, but at the same time, they are using a government and coercing people under threat of violence into doing things. And I will never support that in any way, shape, or form. I always approve of dissidents. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say here. I always approve of dissidents, because in any ruling class, in any structured society with a government or ruling class, there needs to be people like me. You need people like me. You need people like me to sit there and point at authorities and tell everybody that we need to tell these people to fuck off out of here, and that they don't have anything. They can't tell us what to do. They don't have nothing without us. That, you know, they're fucking retards. Like, you need people like me for freedom to exist. Even if you are a statist, and even if we never achieve a governmentless society, even if we achieve total freedom in the belief of, even if we never achieve the giving up of the greatest superstition and authority, if that never comes to fruition, you still need people out there like me. You still need people out there like the author of this book, Larken Rose, like many, many other great people out there that standing on the shoulder of giants is kind of how I feel a lot of the time. But you need us. You do. Otherwise, a complete and utter slave system is going to be out there. 100% slavery. We might be at like 95% slavery right now, but we're not at 100. And that's thanks to the dissidents out there. So yeah, like, even if you're working in the system and you're a dissident in some way, shape, or form, okay, you got my attention. It doesn't mean I necessarily like you, but I approve of your dissidence. I do. And more of it needs to happen. But we need to be cautious too at the same time, because like some of these people are plants and they're just saying the right thing to get everyone going, yeah, there's somebody out there fighting. I don't have to. It's a psyop. It's a stand down psyop. So everybody, it's really on everybody. Like every individual that values freedom and wants to see it go into the future, every single one of us has the responsibility to make sure that happens. All the AI stuff, all the flock cameras, all of the surveillance, all of this shit. I'm 37 years old. The last 25 years have been utter, just it's been I remember a time before all like the Patriot Act stuff. I remember when the Patriot Act was coming out and being put into place, and there were people in my life, adults in my life, that were complaining about all the surveillance and how un-American it was. I didn't truly understand it at the time, being only like 11 or 12. I was 12 when 9/11 happened, and you know, shortly thereafter, the Patriot Act goes into place. So I was still very young. I had my mind on other things like skateboarding, playing guitar, and of course, you know, flirting with some girls and whatever, having fun as a teenage boy. And yeah, but I do vividly remember some adults in my personal life being very upset about the overreach of government and the surveillance that was being put in. And the question was, is that, you know, is it going to be used against American citizens? And the answer to that question was, no, we're looking for the terrorists. Well, look at what's going on now. It's being used against American citizens. There's flock cameras out there that are reporting vehicles to the authorities because the vehicle has a dent in it. There's flock cameras at every toll booth. You don't even have the option at many toll booths anymore. They've gotten rid of 2 of them in my general vicinity to pay in cash. So you're being tracked and traced. It's going into a database, and that data has to be stored somewhere. So what are they going to do with that? They're going to be able to see where you were, when you were there, and how your vehicle condition your vehicle was in. They're putting Ford filed a patent to put video devices inside the cars to read your facial expressions. And if they don't like your facial expression, the car won't start. If you seem too stressed out to drive, by what metric? Like, how do they measure that on an individual? Your biometric data, you give up all of that to some corporation? Are you fucking out of your mind? And people will gladly go out there and buy the new model Ford F-150 because it has a more comfortable seat. But they don't realize that they're giving up biometric data to a fucking corporation that doesn't deserve it, first of all. And second of all, is using it for nefarious purposes. And then they'll go and say, well, I already gave up my biometric data to, the TSA so I could get on the plane faster. What difference does it make? The difference is that there isn't one, actually. It's all stupid and immoral, and you should feel like a fucking idiot coward for even going and saying yes to any of that. And your children will not like you very much when there is no escape. They're already being taught in schools that there's no escape. Every new school in the country is fitted with surveillance that you wouldn't believe. Next time you drive near, if you have kids and you drop them off at high school, my heart goes out to you. You got to do what you got to do. I'm not here to criticize you, but just look around the building. If it's a new high school, next time you have a chance to drive to a new high school, if it's not a creepy thing to do, my line of work, I have to drive all over the place. I go and make deliveries all over the place. I do truck driving in the day, and some of the places I deliver to are schools. And there's one brand new high school that just got built and finished in the last 3 years that I've been delivering to for years. And I even, for a short time when I was in middle school, before I dropped out, back in 2000, I dropped out back in 2006, and I would have graduated in 2007 if I hadn't been held back 2 years. But in 2003, I was in this one school, and it's since been demolished. And the new school that has been built in its place, every 20 yards down the side of the building, on every single corner is a surveillance camera. Now, we don't want people going into these buildings and hurting anybody. We all know what happens when that happens. It's a fucking disgusting act, and I don't want to see it happen to anybody. I'm not here to dispute the legitimacy of those acts of violence. I'm not exactly bought into every narrative of those acts of violence, but it would be a disastrous tragedy for anything like that to happen. And the person perpetrating such an act of violence deserves to be caught, and probably even worse than just being caught. But also, that goes into the brains of the young people. Seeing all that surveillance everywhere all the time. I mean, you're spending 5 days a week in those buildings, mostly 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I think that sums up the tally of 12 years, about 15,000 hours of your life, say, in the presence of heavy surveillance. What does that do to a person's brain when they go to school? And just the surveillance alone leads to people thinking that they are being watched all the time. There is no escape, of course, and like that carries on into the future with a culture of acceptance of this condition, okay, of surveillance and the inescape of authority. They're already doing it to the minds of the young people. So yeah, that and, all the other stuff that the school systems entrain or inculcate into young people's minds that lead to them being obedient little tax slaves for the big banks and the government, the banks who work for the banks. Governments work for banks. These wars are bankers' wars. There's one thing in this book that wasn't mentioned in World War II. Part of the reason why the United States ultimately entered the war is because the loans, because the allies over in Europe are losing, and they were going to default on their loans that the banks in America had given them. So guess who's got to go to war now? but the government needed the people on their side. So it's perfect that Pearl Harbor happened. The same thing happened in World War I with the sinking of the Lusitania, which I think last week I forgot the name of the boat, or a few weeks ago I forgot the name of the boat. The boat is the Lusitania, the sinking of the Lusitania. Same thing happened. American banks sent loans out. The newly formed central bank in America sent loans out to the Allied forces in Europe. And when they were beginning to lose the war, it became apparent that they were going to default on those loans and the banks weren't going to get their money back. And so guess who had to go to war? Okay. And those young men and women, you know, a lot of innocent lives lost because people wanted money. I think I'm going to be done ranting here in a minute. I'm all fired up, and I have Rip to thank for that. It got me going down this rant here. And for those of you not used to seeing it, yes, like this is what my face looks like without any facial hair. It's very rare. And I don't know why I wanted to mention that, just because it's funny. I had a funny occurrence. A really small person in my life saw me with no facial hair for the first time, and he was not pleased. He didn't recognize me. It was really funny. It was really, really funny. Anyways, yeah, people, hey, out there, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And you know what? Like, this is going to be a series that's going to be going on for another 2 or 3 weeks, and it's going to involve it's going to involve this book for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and possibly some more rants like the one you just heard at the end. But in the meantime, if you feel so inclined, you go over to voluntaryistacademy.com and sign up to the newsletters, consider becoming a sponsor, and, you know, consider making one-time donation if you're so inclined. And it all appreciated, all very much loved and appreciated. You know, I feel the love by anyone just simply watching the show and coming back, and maybe leave a comment, or, you know, leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share the videos. Like, that is the best way to support this project. That really is. That is the best way to do it. If you want to support this project, do that. And let my financial worries be my own. Everyone's going through it right now. I get it. I, however, am just putting the bug out there that if you like this project, if you like this channel enough that you want to support it, you can do so by becoming a sponsor. And you'll get access to the Discord server, and we're gonna do meetings and meetups and stuff like that. And you can come and hang out, and we can have private conversations, solutions oriented. I prefer private conversations about the content on the channel, subjects covered on the channel, material covered on the channel, and a solutions oriented approach to the woes and worries and troubles and turmoil out in the world. I'm very loquacious tonight. Anyways, you can catch up on old podcast episodes, and if you want to download PDFs that are covered on this channel, you can do so at voluntaryistacademy.com/resources, where you can download the PDFs. Take them home with you, please. Please store them on a solid state drive somewhere. Ensure that you have offline access to this information. And I've saved you the trouble of going to, you can find these PDFs on your own, but if you come over to voluntaryistacademy.com and find them there too. And so, yeah, do all that stuff. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram. I'm really not a fan of X anymore. I'm really just not a fan of it. I don't like it. I think it's really just not for me. But I still have an account on X. If you're over there, feel free to do that too. And don't forget to consider going over to the Rumble channel and showing some love over there at the Rumble channel. Because if the YouTube channel ever goes the way of the dodo, then you might want to be, over at the Rumble channel, because we'll just switch to, full time over there. So yeah, unless anybody has anything that they want to put in the chat before I sign off, now is the time. almost a 3-hour live stream tonight. Okay, no one's doing that. All right, come back next week, same time, same place, every Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube at Voluntaryist Academy YouTube channel. And you can catch the live stream. If you don't catch the live stream, then I appreciate you listening to the replay. I love you all. And don't just think of taxation as slavery. I mean, you should just think of taxation as slavery. That's what it ultimately is. So don't just think of it as theft. Think of it as slavery, and you'll have a much more accurate view of the reality of the situation. And just like I always like to tell people before I sign off, you own yourself, period. No one else owns you. You know, you're not a slave. They want to make you into one. But in reality, reality is, anarchism is reality. That's the baseline there. And they have to trick you into thinking that authority is real. And what is real actually is freedom, not authority. Freedom is real. Anarchism is real. Governments are fake. They don't really exist. Everything that we've gone over. And you don't own anyone except for yourself. Own yourself. Own your actions. Take responsibility over yourself. Don't let yourself become a cog in the machine. Don't conform to their rules and to their fucking bullshit. And be your own person. And think for yourself. Question authority. I love you all. Have a good night. Peace.
No masters, no slaves, no rulers, no state, no taxes, no cage. To see it is to leave it.
Don't panic.